Welcome back to the series on uncovering hidden spiritual truths. This is our second session, and we are going to go further into the Council of Nicaea, which was in 325 CE, Common Era. That is what some people may refer to as AD, but in academia you refer to it as CE, Common Era. And again, the reason for this is for us to have a deeper connection with the divine, a deeper connection with ourselves, to experience more love and light and happiness in our lives. And really, that's the only reason that I share this. I don't share it to condemn anyone, to make anyone feel bad, to try to change anyone's beliefs. If you're on a journey and you are a devout Christian, Catholic, and you don't, you're good, turn this off, don't listen. But if you're questioning and things don't make sense and you know that God is unconditionally loving and you don't understand why God would be so conditional and judgmental in God's love, then listen along and discover what happened and hear another part of the story, hear some her story, not his story, okay? So we talked earlier in our last video about the Council of Nicaea in 325 and how that was put on by Constantine, and that's where they developed the canon and the creed, which is we believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, and also the date for Easter. And so we just want to, and I want to just give a little bit, I didn't talk about this last time. So there was a conflict between the Jews and the Christians at the time, or around this time in the 300s. And the Easter celebration was changed to not coincide with the Jewish Passover. So the date of Easter was shifted because of this feud, okay? We also have to remember that in the beginning of the church's beginnings, there were no Bibles, there were no missals, there were no hymnals, there was nothing there in that set. And Tal Hussig, he's a professor of biblical literature and early Christianity at Union Theological Seminary. And he also wrote the book, A New Testament, and I'll talk about that later. And has done, stunning research, very deep, in-depth research on Christianity. He teaches about Christianity. And he wants us, academic research shows that the New Testament, which was comprised of Gospels, letters, it did not exist for at least the first 300, if not the first 500 years after Jesus. Okay, so that's a really big thing to note. So there was nobody walking around with the Bible, after Jesus died. That didn't exist. That was not, the Gospels weren't even written until, some say 30, some say 70 years after Jesus died. Okay? So it's a very long time that after Jesus' death that these Gospels even became a part of the Christian movement, okay? Jesus did not leave instructions on the organization of a church. And I want to pause here because I get this image in my mind whenever I think about this statement, this fact. There's a beautiful movie called Mary Magdalene. It's with Joaquin Phoenix. And Mary Magdalene, after Jesus' death, is talking to Peter. And Peter is adamant. In fact, all of the disciples are adamant about this kingdom to come. And they've been waiting for this kingdom to come. And of course, Judas tells the Romans about where Jesus is because he believes, that Jesus can save himself, and then the kingdom will magically come about. And Mary has a different perspective, and so does Jesus. And the perspective is the kingdom is not coming. It's not out there. That the kingdom of God is in here. And this is where the kingdom is. It's within us. But Peter is very adamant. No, I will build my church on the rock of the kingdom to come, right? It is all about this kingdom to come. And so you notice in the Gospels, they talk about the kingdom to come. And even in current Christianity, it's all about the kingdom to come. But this is not necessarily what Jesus taught. And so I want to be very clear that Jesus was not like, oh, let's go create a church. Here's how we're going to create this church. It was not like that, okay? The New Testament was developed after Christian churches spent centuries in arguments and political debates to determine which books would be included in the New Testament. People have egos, in case you didn't realize. And many people, especially in this time, in Roman times, there was a lot about power. And so everybody wanted their say in what gospels to include. So on Easter in 367, Athanasius of Alexandria wrote the festival letter. And he listed the 27 books that eventually became the canon of the New Testament. Okay, so in 367, there was a letter that was sent out by this priest in Alexandria, and it said these are the books that we should use as the foundation for Christianity. So upon consensus of the canonical texts, so that became the canon. The Gospels in the New Testament are considered canon. They're the canon. Upon consensus of the canonical, canon and canonical, same thing, text, the other Gospels that were not included in the New Testament were considered non-canonical or heretical. So there were many, many Gospels that were on the plate for them to choose from. A lot of them talked about how God is within us. And many of them talked about how there's this kingdom to come, because if you remember that when I talked about that story, there was this version of Christianity, which is, oh no, everything is the kingdom to come, or those who truly understand this gnosis version of, no, it's within us. The kingdom of God is within us. Okay, so of course at the time, they weren't called canonical. They were just called Gospels. And they weren't necessarily called heretical. They were just called Gospels. But the non-canonical and claimed to be heretical. Okay, so the church then said, well, these Gospels are heretical. So it's like let's just say we have 10 books, and 5 of the books, the president or the priest, the pope decides these are the books that everybody's going to believe in. But there's like half of the world that still believes in these other books, but the people of power have chosen these are the books, and this is what everybody's going to read. And so these other books are destroyed. Okay? So they were attacked, often violently, forcing many to hide these sacred scriptures. So you're saying, well, how do we even know they exist, right? Okay, so guess what happened? In 1945, a jar of 52 documents from early Christianity was found in the desert of Egypt near the town of Nag Hammadi. This moves me, it makes me emotional. In this collection, works like the Gospel of Mary, Thunder, Perfect Mind, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, and many more were discovered. Upon evaluation, one can see why these Gospels were considered heretical. The Gospel of Thomas proclaims the radical idea that God is within. The Thunder Perfect Mind reframes what it means to be women and men. And the Gospel of Mary opens the door and inspires women with the truth of female leadership in the early Christ movement. Okay, so there are all these other gospels that were hidden because they were being destroyed, which is extremely sad, that people had to hide this messages. So they were hidden for about 1,500 years. These gospels were hidden, which means no one could touch them. No one could change them. They couldn't be misinterpreted. And then old versions tossed out and new ones brought in, right? So in the New Testament, that absolutely happened, right? I mean, like King James Bible, like there's a reason it's called the King James Bible, because the king had his scribes translate it. So, many translations have changed over the centuries. And so, much of what we read today in the New Testament, it could be accurate or inaccurate based on the interpretation of the person who was translating it. Not these. Why? Because they were hidden. Nobody could touch them. And so they recently come out in 1945, and then they start to be translated. Now, could there be some mistranslations based on, what was said then and now? Yeah, but it wasn't changed over and over and over again to get the message that the kings or the priests or the popes wanted for people to hear. And I'm not saying that was always the case, but I'm just saying books change. Okay. Throughout the rest of this paper, the development of the New Testament, the Nicene Creed, and the works of Constantine, which most refer to as Christian fact, will be referred to as history. I also refer to what is hidden or more difficult to understand, or what I see as a more accurate interpretation of early Christian movement, as history. So, let's talk about history. Okay, a feminist perspective on Christian history. Now, some people are put off by the word feminist. Change it. You don't like it, change it, take it out. This is just a different perspective on Christianity. Before moving into the inspiring works of the Gospel of Mary and women in the early Christ movement, and supposed lack thereof, I will briefly provide the history of Christianity from female authors. This was a challenging task. None of the resources on the first 3 pages of Google Scholar were written by women when searching the history of Christianity. By updating my search to Christian history by women authors, I found the work of Elizabeth A. Clark. She's a professor of religion at Duke University. Barbara J. McAfee. She's a professor of religion at Marietta College. Feme Perkins, who's a professor of theology at Boston College. And my favorite, Karen King, who is a professor of ecclesiastical history at Harvard University. This book is by her. I love Karen King. Okay. Oh, and when I say this book, I mean the Gospel of Mary of Magdalene. Okay. So given the difficulty of finding texts from female authors in 2024, it seems that the inclusion of female works has not varied much since the beginning of Christianity. Adding more to the complexity of understanding the early Christian movement from a female perspective is that all of the sources of information were written and interpreted by men. Studying the status of women in the first 6 centuries of Christianity is a difficult task, as beliefs and practices vary greatly from place to place throughout the centuries. However, since the exploration of additional resources outside of the written text, including anthropology, art, and understanding the similarities and differences of Roman, Greek, and Jewish tradition for women compared to Christian lives, more is being understood about Christian women. I'll pause there. That was a lot to take in. So hold on, I'm going to take a drink. Okay. So I mentioned in the last video, not very many people were literate at that time. In fact, there's data that in the 1800s that only approximately, oh man, can't remember the exact number now. You'll have to go ChatGPT this. But a small percentage of people were actually literate. And I'm talking under 20% of the entire world could read in the 1800s. And if you look at this, yeah, this seems right. We didn't really have a lot of school. People were still doing farm work. They were still doing factory work. They were still doing industrial work. People didn't have time to learn how to read. And, the majority of the world didn't even really need to read, right? It was very different times. And this is, 150 years ago. This is not a long time ago. So you can imagine the literacy rates back in the day, right? Back in the time of Christ, people were living their lives. Studying scholarship was considered a privilege. Reading was considered a privilege. It was for the elite. And so not very many people knew how to read. Okay, so a lot of the interpretations of early Christianity was done through artwork. And there's actually artwork. It's very interesting if you follow Christian artwork throughout the ages in the early, prior to, I guess you would say like in the first century through the 7th or 8th century, 6th, 7th, and 8th century. What you'll find is that the women were very prominent. They stood tall in the artwork. But over time, the woman went from standing tall in the artwork, being next to Jesus, being next to the disciples, to crouching down. And in the next artwork, kneeling. And in the next artwork, on the floor, like on the ground. And in the next artwork, not even there. And so you see throughout the ages of the artwork in Christianity that the women were taken out of the story. It's not that they were out of the story in the beginning, it's that they were taken out of the story. Okay? Let's talk about how we feel about that. I've always loved God. You know this. And I'll tell you again, I love Jesus. I never really understood why women weren't a part. In fact, I questioned the priests. Why can't women be a part of this? I don't understand. And they're like, oh, well, they are. They could be nuns. And I'm like, well, the nuns aren't preaching the gospel. And so it was to me, I never understood it. Even from the time I was a child, I was like, this does not seem right. There is no reason that women cannot get up and preach the gospel. Absolutely none. And of course, in many churches, that's accurate. Women preach and teach. However, there's many religions in which they don't. This was not the experience of the first Christ movement. This is not what happened in Jesus' time. Jesus was not saying that women cannot teach. That is not what happened. And so, does it make me angry? Yes. And there's this beautiful quote by Gloria, and I forgot her last name. She's an activist, and she says, the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. But first, it will piss you off. And so when I learned these things, I was so pissed off about the lies of women in the church and the lies of women being able to preach and, of them not being able to preach and the lies that women never did preach, like all of these lies. And so it was a very frustrating and angry time for me. But what I realized is that, there was actually a lot of fear around women because of, women's power, because of our abilities, not just in giving birth to child, but giving birth to life, of what we can create. And so really, even though there's a part of me that was angry, there's also this part of me now that's like, yeah, I'm going to own that. I'm not going to allow that. I'll be pissed off for a minute, but now I'm going to see that, like, women did preach, women did teach. They were just lies that covered up the truth. And out of fear of the feminine. And you look at this world today and you can see how the feminine is missing in many, many different aspects, and how detrimental it is to the earth and to the world and to relationships. And when we fear something, I invite us, and I'll just say this for me personally. When I fear something, I want to understand it. I don't want to run from it. I want to understand what the fear is. Why do I fear it within me? And I'm not saying that we have to go understand other people's fears of the feminine or other people's fears of women teaching and preaching the Gospels. But we need to understand our own. We need to understand what parts of us don't believe that we are worthy of talking about God. What parts of us don't believe that we are worthy of speaking our truth and having our voices heard. We need to understand what parts of us fear standing in our power and serving as we are called. Because it's not the truth. The truth is that we have been called to speak, to share, to preach, to teach. And that was covered up by lies. So let this be an inspiration. Let this be a motivation. Let this inspire you to create the change that you want in your life, knowing that there are strong, independent, beautiful, inspiring women that came before you. And whatever's on your heart that you want to teach about or preach about or share about, I invite you to do it. Like, get really clear about what's holding you back. Get really clear about what fears you have about standing in your power as a woman. And start to make choices that are different. Start to embody the Mary Magdalene within you. Start to embody the powerful women that came before us, so that we can make a change in the world, so that we can love. Again, I'm going to say, I said this in a couple of videos ago, it's not about change, it's about love. So that we can love more, so that we can receive more love, so we can give more love, so we could just allow love to embody us and others and our children. And so that we don't walk around so scared and so fearful about who we are and what we say and what we think. You don't have to please anymore. You just get to be you. Sending you so much love.